Hello everyone, welcome to episode number 26 of the Bill podcast, and today we'll be going through Modernizr, which is a feature detection tool. Now, it is very inevitable that in today's world, as a developer, we are in fact developing for various types of browsers, versions, and devices. So it is very important for us to pick up some kind of feature detection. This means to say that, hey, if the feature is available, implement it. If the feature is not available, use some kind of fallback. So Modernizr, as it says right here, that it is a JavaScript library to detect HTML5 and CSS3 features in the user's browser. It comes with a very nice documentation, which is very self-explanatory in itself. And also, before I go on to Modernizr itself, let us talk about two different concepts. The first one is called Graceful Degradation, and the second one is called Progressive Enhancement. So whenever a feature is available or not available, you can use these two different philosophies in general. So what is the difference? Graceful Degradation starts with the most advanced technology, the most advanced version of either a device or the browser, and then it kind of slowly degrades as you go towards the older technologies. Progressive Enhancement, on the other hand, is just the opposite. It places more emphasis on the content, and it makes sure that no matter what you're using, the content is available. Notice that there is no mention of advanced technologies or versions. Graceful Degradation is a top-down approach, and Progressive Enhancement is a bottom-up approach. I tend to prefer Progressive Enhancement, which places much more importance on the content itself. So just as a demo, let me show you through this Lynx browser, which is actually a text-based web browser. So let me come on to my command line, and over here what I'll do is Lynx, and then I'll press website name. So maybe in this case it's my little website here, and notice here it will try to come and detect what's the content on the website. Notice it's all text-based. And as you can see, yeah, I have pretty much all the content being displayed here, at least in text. But notice here RMTG, it doesn't kind of make sense. Maybe I need some work to do there. So let's just go on here, and I'll just click share, which is a hyperlink, and then it will go to Bill Podcast. And once again, even without seeing any of the web design, at least my content is viewable. So that in gist is what Progressive Enhancement should do. So that's something a bit fun. All right, so let's go on to the project of today, where we will go through what is a Modernizr and how we can use it in our everyday projects. So today we'll be building a very simple slideshow like this. So as usual in Bill Podcast, every project will in itself teach us something. And today we'll make a very simple slideshow, and it's all about single board computers. I think there's some really fun stuff going on in this part of the world. And basically what I'm showing is just 4 single board computers, which are open source and you can order them online. The first one is called Arduino, and the second one is Raspberry Pi, and the third and fourth one are BeagleBoard and PandaBoard. So go and read about it. So what we'll try to do is we'll try to build this project, detect some features, for example, some box shadow over here, or some RGBA colors, or even some HTML5 semantic tag like the header tag. And also, as you can see, this animation is totally done in CSS3. But what happens if I try to view it in a legacy browser or an older browser such as IE8? This will not work. So we will kind of fall back to a JavaScript way of doing the slideshow. So we'll learn this and a lot more. All right, so let's go back and look at our very bare bones, which is just the HTML and some plain CSS that I've done. So let's first go ahead and look at our code. All right, so if we go back to index.html, it is a very simple page. I've just linked here to style.css and just a list item, unordered list item with the image and a h2 tag inside to say the name. And above it, I have the header with h1 text inside saying single board computers. Very simple. Now, how do we use Modernizr? The very first thing we will do is we will get a copy of the Modernizr. The way I like to get a copy of the Modernizr is either, of course, download it from the production version, which is minified, or I like to go to cdn.js. So here you can find a lot of other open source libraries. So I'll just come here and copy it. The current version of Modernizr is 2.6.2, which is just the same as the current version here. There you go. It's released on 4th September. So let me go back to my index.html, and right now I'll go to my head tag. So firstly, before I do that, let us just inspect element. I'll just come back to my elements here and look inside the head. So it is exactly the same as what I have in my file. So over here I will now paste in the cdn.js link to Modernizr, and I'll save it. And when I come back to the browser here, notice what happens. Immediately the HTML tag will come prefixed with a few classes. In fact, these classes are all the CSS3 and HTML classes. Next thing I will do is try to take away the CSS3. The way I do that is with this very handy little bookmarklet, which you can just drag it to your toolbar. So notice here I will once again come back, and then I will click DCSS3. So notice what happens to all the classes here. And notice here immediately you will have no dash prefix to all the features here. This basically says that, hey, these are not available and therefore I can't display it. And immediately you'll also notice that things like box shadow are no longer there. So let's go ahead and do some stuff to it. Firstly, I'll just come back to style.css, and because it will become a slideshow, I will just want to place all of them position absolute at the top. I'll come right at the bottom and I will kind of do position absolute, left 0, top 0. The moment I do that, notice all the slides will come right at the top. And let's finally deal with the little annotation here. So I'll come to H2 and I'll do the same thing, position absolute, bottom maybe 20 pixel this time, and I can just do left 0. Okay, so there you go. I have everything here right at the top position, but of course there's no animation happening. So when I DCSS3, notice that the shadow will go away. So let's see what happens. Yep, the shadow goes away. So how do you deal with a browser that cannot display the box shadow, which is a CSS3? So I will come back to my CSS and I will go to the portion where the box shadow is displayed. And notice here, it is right here. Now I will come back to my Option Command J and the inspector panel here. And notice, so let me just go back to DCSS3, and I will try to locate the one with the box shadow. So there you go, no box shadow. So I will come here and I'll copy this, come back to style.css, and right below the element that I am actually declaring box shadow, I will do no box shadow, and then exactly the same element. So I'll just copy here dot slides and list item. Then I will put in a fallback style. So let's say it's a border of 3 pixels, solid and gray. I come back here, notice that I have a gray border instead of a box shadow. So once again, when I have the CSS3 box shadow, it will be a shadow here, but when I do not have a CSS3, it will fall back to just a border. Next, for the sake of testing it in an older browser, I will open up my VirtualBox and try to go into my Windows 8 and then access IE8 through the IE10 panel. Just to note, all these files and folders are already inside my Dropbox folder. So when I try to access my Windows 8 on top of virtual machine, I will go to my Inside the Windows 8 Dropbox folder, I will now open up the index.html with Internet Explorer. So inside my IE10, it obviously looks fine because IE10 supports box shadows as well as HTML5 tags. But now let's go to the developer tools here and try to simulate an IE8, and let's see what happens. And notice that it has fallen gray border here. But notice that my RGBA is also not working. There was a slight border behind the title of the picture. And of course my HTML5 is tag for header is working. That's because Modernizr is supporting HTML5 tags. So looking at an older browser for this project, we have identified 4 places where it needs to fall back gracefully to other features. So feature number 1 is the box shadow. Feature number 2 is RGBA. Feature number 3 is HTML5 header, and feature number 4 is the animation itself. Now I am inside my host operating system, and this time instead of taking the entire production library that detects a lot of CSS3 and HTML5, we will just choose the ones that we require. So for this we will go to the development version, where we will see tons of ways to kind of toggle on and off the features we want to discuss. So let me just toggle them all off, and what I'll do is I'll just choose the box shadow, which is right here, and I will also choose RGBA, which is right here, and in the extras I will definitely choose HTML5 shiv so that it can detect the header tag, and I will also check Modernizr load, yep, nope, and finally add the CSS class. Alright, so I will generate it and I'll make sure that it is minified as well. So I will copy the entire bit here and come back to my index.html over here, and instead of linking the entire file, I will just link it to Modernizr, which is probably hosted on my site. So let me just rename it as just modernizr.js, and inside here I will paste in the generated code. Let us just save it and go back to the browser of our project. And now when we load it, notice that only a few of the features are detected. Maybe I should also take out the canvas and the canvas text, but nevertheless RGBA and box shadow, that is what we want to detect, is just there. I think this considerably reduces the file size as well. So I will just go here and uncheck the canvas and canvas text and generate it once again. Copy it and paste it right here and replace it. Okay, so I am back here and I refreshed it, and guess what? Only RGBA and box shadow is being detected. That is great. So I'm very specific to the project. Okay, so let's finally deal with the RGBA. So for that we will do something very similar. We'll come to style.css. So step number 1 is to find the part of the CSS where RGBA is used, which is being used right here, background RGBA. So after this, I'll come back here, again use dcss3. As soon as that, you will see that the no is being prefixed. So I'll just copy this one, come back to my CSS, so dot no RGBA and then h2. So maybe this time I'll just create a background of just a green color. And along with that, maybe also the text color can be white so that it's more prominent. Okay, so I save it, and there you go. We have the RGBA support when it is not available, and we also have the box shadow support when it is not available. To learn how to make a plain CSS3 slideshow, I have taken inspiration and hints from this beautiful demo in Smashing Magazine. So please do go ahead and check out. We will not do such a complicated demo. This demo is really beautiful. For example, there is actually a progress bar that goes on, and there are some hover effects. We will not have so many features, but we will definitely take inspiration from that. Let's go ahead and make this slideshow only in CSS3. So to do that, we will come back to our index.html. We will create a separate CSS and we will call it slides.css. So I am inside my slides.css. So the first thing we will do is define the keyframes. So for that, I will define one keyframe each for each cycle. We will be making the opacity 1 or 0. So to do that, we will go from 0% to 100%. And since there are 4 pictures, we will have it divided by 4. So there will be a 0%, 25%, 50%, and then finally 100%, which is the same as 0%. For the first picture, we will have opacity as 1. But for 25%, we want the opacity to be 0, and 50% is also 0. And 100% is 1 because it is the same as 0%. We also want slight fading effect. So to do that, we will take about 4%. In 21%, the opacity will still be 1, and it will take about 4% to do the fade out. This is fade out. Similarly, at 96%, we will take 4% to do a fade in. So opacity, and this will be fade in. Okay, so that basically describes what will happen in one picture. Now we will be testing this in both IE as well as WebKit. I will add in the vendor prefix. Of course, you should be using some kind of CSS preprocessor to add in these vendor prefixes. Okay, and I will copy the same thing for Microsoft Internet Explorer and put it as MS. So this is only for picture number 1. Let's do the same for picture number 2, and that we will name it as cycle 2. So I will start cycle 2 with everything as opacity 0. So let me just copy this and name it as cycle 3. And finally, we have a cycle 4. So let me name this as cycle 4. So in cycle 1, we saw that the opacity was only from 0 to 25. In cycle 2, we will change that from 25 only. In cycle 3, it will be at 50% only. And finally, at cycle 4, it will be at 100%. So same thing, we will start in cycle 2 at 21% and make the opacity as 0. And this will be fade in. Next, when it kind of fades out, we will have it at 46%, opacity 1, and we will have it as fade out. And finally, we will copy this cycle 2 and make it for IE as well. So I will add the same fade in and fade out for cycle 3, as well as add in the MS WebKit vendor prefixes. So I have already done that. So there you have it, fade in, fade out for each of the keyframes defined in both WebKit as well as IE browser. The final thing that we need to do is connect up these keyframes and animations. So for that, firstly, we will have to decide what are we targeting. We will be targeting the slides and then the list item. So let me come back to slides. So dot slides list item, and for the nth child 1, we will declare the animation. So it will be simply as animation cycle 1 for 16 seconds. It is linear in a timing function, and it will be infinite times. And of course, we need to add in the WebKit vendor prefix, and I will copy the same thing for IE as well. And there you go, we have the nth child 1 defined for WebKit as well as MS. So I'll just copy the entire thing for the nth child 2, 3, and 4. And there you have it. We have nth child 2, 3, 4, and we also have cycle 1, 2, 3, and 4, but the timings are the same, and so is the timing function at infinite. So now when we come back to the browser and we refresh it, we should see the slideshow happening. And yes, it is happening, only in plain CSS3. Now notice what happens when I try to de-CSS3 it. Of course, it falls back to the gray border. It falls back to the plain gray background without RGBA, but guess what? There is no animation happening because it is not supported. CSS3 animation is not supported. So to deal with this in a fallback mode where CSS3 animation is not supported, we will have to load this library called YepNope that is already coming with Modernizr. So YepNope is as simple as this. When you detect that a certain thing is available, if it is yes, then you load something. For us, it will be slides.css, and if it is no, then you load something else. It can be either a CSS or JavaScript. It is as simple as that. So let's go ahead and I will just copy this come back to my index.html, and inside the script tag, I'll just paste in. Of course, for the first part, we have to detect the Css3 animations. Now, when I load my browser console, I'll see that CSS animations, all right? So I'll just copy this, come back to my yep, nope part, and I'll just paste it here. If the Css3 animations is available, I will of course load in slides.css. If it is not available, I will create another new JavaScript file, and I'll just delete all of this and call it slides.js. So let's create the slides.js file, and just to check that it is available, so I'll just say hello from the fallback JavaScript. Okay, so looks like we have the slides.css and slides.js. Next, what I'll do is I will fire up my VirtualBox and just test this little JavaScript that is working. So I am inside IE 10, inside my Windows 8 in the virtual machine. And as you can see, the CSS3 animation is working perfectly fine because I'm in the IE 8, which supports CSS3. Now let me go down here and change it to IE 8 and notice what happens. It will immediately fall back, and there you go, there'll be an alert coming from the fallback JavaScript that we initiated. So our test is working. So let's come back to our slides.js file, and we will delete it, and this time we will implement a JavaScript slideshow. Of course, we will not go through the JavaScript part of it. Just for the sake of demo, we will start with document.ready, and then I'll create some variables. So the first variable is slide, which means to say that inside the class slides target each of the list item. And I will also initiate that slide.fadeout. It will take about very little 10 milliseconds. So after this, I'll go ahead and create a fade function fade, and then inside that I will just have an element inside. So for each of the element, what I will do is firstly I will fade it in for 300 milliseconds, and then I will delay it for 4,000 milliseconds, and then of course I will fade it out for the same amount of time, which is 300 milliseconds. And after that, I will have an inline function. So first, for the function, I will define what is the next. This dot next. This is just to ensure that you can select the next list item, which is the next slide. And there we will have a little bit of recursiveness, so we will call back the function again. And if the next element is available, which is, I'll check it by length, more than 0, then you select the next. Else, you select the same item, and then you go to the parent item, you go to the children, and of course you choose the first one because there is none available for the next. Right, so that's our little fade function, and of course after we are done with the fade function, we will have to call it. So we will do it just by fade, and then we will call slide, which we defined it right up here, and we will call the first of them. That should be working. So how do we just test it without the use of going back to the VirtualBox? I'll just delete all of them, just call slides.js, and of course because this takes in the jQuery, I will have to include the jQuery library, which I've taken from CDN.js, and this should be the JavaScript slideshow. And yes, it is. As you can see, the slideshow is slightly different. So let me just come back here, and I will, instead of calling it singly, I will use it with the yep nope. Okay, so I have inserted back the yep nope, and there you have it. If it is yes, use slides.css, and if it is no, use slides.js. And finally, we will just go back to the VirtualBox and test it in IE8 browser mode. So this is obviously happening with the CSS3 animations because the fading in and fading out is happening at the same time. So I will just go back to the browser mode and choose IE8. And there you have it. IE8 in a little fallback mode. It is happening perfectly fine with gray borders, with gray background for the annotation, and of course the slideshow happening completely with JavaScript, no CSS3 support here. And that's it for this episode of Modernizr feature detection. I hope in summary it has enabled us to learn about how to kind of detect for CSS. So for example, when we went to slide.css, we added in this little snippet of class and say, hey, what should we do for fallback? Or we have also learned to kind of add a little bit of script to say, yes, when the feature is available, what should we do? No, if it is not available, maybe load up something else. And of course, finally in Modernizr, there's this little handy tool of checkboxes to kind of check what your project requires, along with HTML5 shiv and yep nope. So that's quite a bit. So happy building stuff for any devices and any browsers with progressive enhancement. And finally, I also hope it gave you a little bit insight into single board computers. Some very exciting stuff are happening there. So for the build link of the episode, it is the big web show by one of the people that I also admire, is Jeffrey Zeldman. So do follow this on iTunes as well. Every episode, he actually interviews amazing people like Chris Coyer, Evan Williams, Jen Robbins, Dan Benjamin, and so much more. And just through their talking, I have learned a lot as well. So Jeffrey Zeldman, do follow him in his blog. He's constantly experimenting and really living at the bleeding edge, and of course his Twitter as well. Finally, for all the other episodes of Build Podcast, do visit build-podcast.com and really just go through one of the channels, whichever you like, and watch it every week. And I'll see you next week, and hope you had a great time learning about Modernizr. Thank you, and see you next week.